Hey guys, it's Alex and Dad from 7th Hour Films back again with Doctor Who. Last time on Doctor Who, we had Earthshock with the 5th Doctor. Let's see, what all did they do last time? They went to Earth, found some caves, found some androids, left that, found the Cybermen, and Adric died.
But also had a wonderful plot twist, which they set up in the first episode and didn't then reveal the ending until the last episode, which was pretty cool.
Yes, the twist of how Adric died, which was interesting.
But that's not a spoiler for anyone.
Screw it. I'll assume that if you're watching this episode, you've watched the last episode. Oh well. Well, then I guess I shouldn't say that. Technically, that was part 1 in a week of losing companions on Doctor Who for me, because the next episode I watched in Doctor Who also had some companions that were lost. But that's not the point. Today, we are actually not doing a reaction. While we are giving our thoughts on something, we are doing a review today. We are doing the 2000 audio drama The Holy Terror, which was a 6th Doctor audio. And so, we might as well just get right into our thoughts. Dad, why don't you start?
All right. My first comment is that I don't care for the form. All right. That being said, thought it was well written. A lot of really good humor. One of the very first notes I took down was that it was very Python-esque. A lot of the accents were just on the border of being ludicrous, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But listening to the 4 episodes with no visuals was very difficult. I'm in theater, and I told Alex in a discussion we had a day or so ago, it was like when I watch ballet. I understand that they're moving and their movement is supposed to express the feelings and the thoughts, but I keep wanting to say, speak up, I can't hear you. I don't understand audio with no visuals and visuals with no audio. I like the two of them integrated. I'm that very first generation of TV kids. We got our first TV when I was about 3 years old, so this does nothing for me as a genre, all right, as a format. That said, 2 entire pages of notes here.
This is the first time I've ever told him to take notes on anything, and he took a lot of notes.
Look at all the scribbling and all the stuff that I had to do while waiting for this tedious thing. I never do this when we watch visuals.
Yeah.
But I took down a whole bunch of notes.
Yeah. Now, I will say, with your sort of thoughts on the format of audio, now, you read books.
Yes.
Where there are no visuals. But
yes.
All that has to come from you.
Yes. It's much easier to do that to me. To read a book, again, I can visualize it in my mind. It's the same thing when I read a play script. I think of actors that I've worked with, and I can put them together, and I can put it together in my head. But in this, you hear the voice, for example, of Eugene Tacitus, and you kind of get this idea in your mind, and then as it goes on, that's not the way you originally pictured him. And of course, we're going to be dealing with Frobisher here in just a moment. Seriously, do not understand that at all. Funny bit, but no. I mean, yeah. I don't get it.
And here, while we're here, I never actually showed you the cover of this audio.
Yes, I saw that in the bottom down at the very bottom of the screen.
Yes, they did have that on Spotify. Which we should say, if you would like to listen to The Holy Terror in all of its audio glory, right down in the description will be a link to where you can listen to it on Spotify, which is where we watched it.
All hail the giant talking bird.
Yeah. See, that was something interesting when we went through this, because the schedule maker, they do a great job. They explain things when they need to. And so when I was looking over the description that they gave for this, it's like, okay, it has one of his comic book companions, Frobisher. He was introduced in the comics, not in the TV show at all. And it said, and he's a giant talking penguin. And I was like,
why?
Okay. that's interesting. And so when I emailed you the link for everything, I decided to put some context in as well. I was like, yeah, this is the Sixth Doctor. You heard him on Vengeance on Varos and stuff like that. And I was like, his companion is Frobisher. Yes, he's a penguin. No, I don't know why.
And again, the visual, in the picture there of the audio book, he's very comical looking.
Yeah.
But again, that's very distracting because on top of everything else, he has a very slight and somewhat bad New Jersey accent.
That was also interesting.
I'm not understanding why Frobisher talks like this. There's not a lot of penguins in New Jersey, if you know what I'm saying. Forget about it.
Yeah.
I having taught geography, penguins in South America, penguins live as far north as Peru, because the equatorial current brings the cold water up there. But a penguin from New Jersey, that again, about Python-esque and somewhat distracts from. I mean, yes, it's kind of cool that the people, very much like with Brian, they all hail the giant talking bird, which shows the absurdity of the whole religion and ritualistic thing. But it's too jarring,
Yeah.
It's one thing to have a penguin. That's kind of acceptable, but a penguin with a Jersey accent for no reason it's like, no,
yeah.
I don't get it.
Well, and especially because, they say here he is a shapeshifter, and apparently this is just the form he likes to take, is a talking penguin. So why he specifically has a Jersey accent, I mean, it had to have been something that was in the comic book. They would have to write that into the speech bubbles, add in an accent in text, and so they just had to translate it here.
Either that, or he comes from a planet very similar to New Jersey, which would be really kind of horrifying to think that there's an entire planet of New Jerseyans out there somewhere. I've known some New Jerseyans; they're nice people, but I mean, if you've seen them on TV, you happen to know, the whole Jersey Shore.
Yeah. So that was definitely interesting. The introduction of Frobisher, but overall, I did like his character. Now, I should say, all the problems that you have with the format, I don't have these problems. You were saying that it can be hard to visualize where they are and everything, and like when there's a scene change, you were saying it's hard to figure out where they are. I didn't have that problem.
Well, again, and you have to understand, Alex and I talked about this just briefly before we started doing this. I mentioned before, done a lot of Shakespeare. And, when Shakespeare performed on the bare stage, people would come on stage and someone would say, "Where are we?" Like in Twelfth Night, "This is Illyria, lady." So there needs to be something to set up, in my opinion, where you are when you have nothing but the speech. So at the very beginning, where they've got Eugene Tacitus apparently in prison, takes you a couple of minutes to figure that out. And then you're going, wait a minute, Tacitus is a Roman name, but Eugene is not. So why does he have this hybrid, partially Jewish, partially Roman name? Because that would also make no sense.
Right.
So anyway, again, all that aside, I thought the idea of the script, this idea of this, the almost like the Pharisees of the Old Testament, the people who are so absolutely enthralled with the ritual that they've forgotten what the rituals mean, was a very interesting script, and would make a wonderful new. I mean, if they rebooted this with whatever doctor they're on now, I think it would be an interesting script. Again, modern day CGI technology would make Frobisher look more like a real penguin, but still.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing about that is that there's one part that I don't feel would work if they redid this with one of the more modern doctors, and that is the Doctor himself. Did you notice that the Doctor was very odd in this set of episodes? And I actually, the good thing about the fact that we finished these, we actually finished these a few days ago. So I was talking to someone on Twitter about it, and I was like, the Doctor's reactions to everything, when people are being tortured and dying all for this tradition and stuff, and he's pretty chill about it, actually. Like, it wasn't until the end, like when the child was brought up, that the Doctor actually was like, no, we have to I have to do something about this. This has to end. And someone said, it's like, well, that's the Sixth Doctor, apparently, is that he is a more, I guess, sort of chill Doctor.
Yeah, very laid back. He was almost incidental to this story. It seemed like Frobisher was more involved in it than he was.
Yes, he was just kind of walking around until the ending.
It's like that they did on The Big Bang Theory when Dr. Fowler watched Indiana Jones for the first time, and then when she finished watching it, she said, "You do realize, of course, that Indiana Jones was entirely non-essential to that script." And everybody went, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Imagine, take him out of it, and what happens? The Germans ultimately find what they're looking for. They open the chest, and they all die. That would have happened with or without him." So it's almost like you could take the Doctor out of this episode entirely, and it would ultimately, I mean, you need somebody coming in from the outside to show the absurdity, but that apparently is what Frobisher seems to be for.
Yes.
Again, he seems way more involved in this than the Doctor does.
Right. Now, because I'm even trying to think, like, at the end, when Tacitus is confronting the child, did the Doctor necessarily, like, do anything in the ending of that? Like the ending of that sort of situation. I'm not really sure. It's a little hard to remember.
Well, again, it vaguely reminded me of the Christopher Nolan Batman, the original Batman Begins, where at the end, Batman and Ra's al Ghul are on the subway headed for Wayne Tower, and Ra's al Ghul says, "You can't kill me. I know you can't kill me," and Batman looks at him and says, "Yes, but I don't have to save you either." And I think the Doctor understands that in order to let this happen, the two, the young boy and Eugene Tacitus have to finish this out so that the story goes away.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's, again, vaguely reminiscent of that.
Yeah. Which, by the way, if we want to talk about odd voices, that kid's voice was annoying. That was a very... I don't know. It's just this weird sort of voice.
Well, that's because I went back and looked at the cast list. The actor who played Eugene Tacitus, the old man, that was his actual voice, which they had somehow augmented so that he sounded like a young boy coming back. But you could tell when they modulated it. So, and again, in audio, that'd be easy enough for him to do all of his lines as the boy and then all of his lines as Eugene and then just put them together technologically. Right. But yeah, that was his, because I noticed it says Eugene Tacitus and boy and then gives the actor's name. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but if I had not seen that, yes, you're right. To me, the young boy's voice would have been very, very odd and somewhat creepy, which I suppose it's supposed to be.
And another thing that is interesting is that towards the end of the fourth episode, we just kind of drop like many of the characters we had been following so that we could focus on Eugene Tacitus, which I also thought was kind of a bit of a jarring sort of switch around. It's like, no, it's been about him this whole time. It's like, well, what about Pepin? What about Childrix and everything? It's like, well, that was... But it's just that they were all part of this fiction for him.
Fiction, yeah, and they all had to ultimately... drop away so that Tacitus his story could be resolved there.
Yeah.
So again, I kind of understood how that was happening.
Yeah.
There's some. I mean, it's kind of happening now on the CW Arrowverse shows, where you literally see the rest of the universe is dissolving and all coming down to this one particular plot point, and you kind of going, yes, but I mean, thousands and billions of planets are all dying, but that's because. Yeah. When you think about it, you have to let it go. This is it's all part of the fiction. It has to play out to the end. And then we're back to normal.
That's true. So let's see. I should mention that technically we have limited amount of footage on my camera just because I didn't clean it off after my last recordings. So if we just suddenly just freeze for no reason, it means that we've become an audio drama and... We've become a podcast, so just in case that happens, but I don't know, because I didn't know how long we were going to talk about this. So let's see. Well,
I can do a couple of things here just to start off. The fact that Childrick is very Shakespearean, I mean, actually quotes Richard III, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up. But names like Berengaria and Pepin, that comes from the Charlemagne era, so we're jumping from... Richard III, who's 1400s maybe, late 1300s, maybe mid 1400s, going back to the 800s with Clovis and Pepin and Berengaria. I've never heard of Childeric before, but I'm sure that's probably something they stole from that time period. But then going back to a name like Tacitus, Arnulf is probably an old Viking name. It's just a very, and then you throw Frobisher into the middle of that, and you go, well, what the heck?
Yeah.
So yes, I kind of, that was a little weird, and Keptus Sejanus, that's very Roman. So obviously they're trying to show that somehow or other somebody knows something about history, whether it was the writer's intention to do that, to make you drawn in and going, wait a minute, they're drawing from different kinds of fiction and history. Maybe that will set up the fact that it does come down to the end where it's just a story to torment the old man.
That would kind of make sense. It's sort of just a clue about all this. It's like, well, it's not just because it seems to be a very medieval place, but then you're right, with all these different names, that is sort of a clue to sort of let you in on that. I like the idea that the TARDIS went on strike. That was an interesting one.
I wrote down that she was sulking and that she does react to flattery.
Yeah. Which makes sense. And I like Frobisher's line when the Doctor says it's like, oh, the TARDIS will just take complete control and plop us down wherever she feels like. And Frobisher's just like, so basically what she already does. It's like, yeah, the TARDIS already does that. It's like, I don't know what the big difference is here.
Yeah.
But it's just that the TARDIS was doing this more overtly. It's like, you guys, we're landing here, get out, and come back when you've learned your lesson, not to make a fish and then eat it.
And that seemingly inconsequential, I'm here in the bathtub eating live fish rather than canned fish, and then that comes all the way back again at the very end. Again, I almost completely dropped that and didn't even take a note about it, other than I wrote down fish, penguin, what's going on. But it does come back around at the end. Now, I have to say, again, some really well done lines. He committed the ultimate blasphemy. He died. That's hysterical, in light of the history that we know. And the other one was, wouldn't you think that the prerequisite of a high priest is to have a little faith? Just some absolute, Monty Python type lines in here. So it kept my interest, but I kept going, it's just so hard to try to visualize all of these different characters. If you're going to do an audiobook, just have 3 or 4 people so that you know exactly what's going on. But
that's true. Trying
to put 10, 12 people together in a single scene without somebody saying, my lord, there's Childeric talking, I don't know, it bothers me.
I mean, for most of them, when I would imagine them, it's like, okay, Pepin, I would just kind of imagine him in these bright blue royal clothes, like, okay, what about Tacitus? Like, he kind of has like a robe, maybe a little hood or something, while he's writing, and it's like, maybe that is why they specifically went with Frobisher, because if you know right off the bat, well, he's a giant talking penguin, it's like, well, you're going to remember that. So anytime the New Jersey accent shows up, that's him.
Yeah.
Although I will say, another thing about the Doctor, actually, because this is, we kind of joke, this is the Doctor of every color, because this particular Doctor has such an odd costume. But one thing that was interesting was it's the same guy. It's still Colin Baker as the Doctor reprising his role. And this was made in 2000. He does sound a lot older. He doesn't, anytime I would hear his voice and I tried to picture him, I was like, that is where I'm losing the connection. I'm like, that sounds like a much older man than the Doctor we see. And he's still supposed to be the same body.
Yeah.
So, that was one little thing where I was like, I'm kind of losing it there. Let's see. Let's see. There was the Assassination Ritual. That was funny because that was a good cliffhanger off of episode 1.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, there's an assassination here, and then next episode's like, oh, they were firing blanks. It's just part of, we got to confirm that he's a god.
Yeah.
That was interesting, and just the whole thing of, that when a previous emperor and god dies, it's like they are just completely gotten rid of. if you still worship him, even if you don't know that he's died, you're out of here unless you recant at the last second. Which
also seems to be somewhat ritualistic.
Yeah,
once you do learn, it's like, oh, sure, I can give him up. I'm on with it. I'm down with the new god.
Right. So that was interesting. And when they're like, oh well, they've probably gone to his tomb and they're desecrating his bones and everything. It's like, chill out. The Romans didn't do that.
Yeah. Well, I do have to say my favorite 2 lines from the part 2 was when was it Clovis? Who's the scribe?
The scribe is Tacitus.
Oh, the scribe is Tacitus. He had the line about talking about this entire thing and this incredible 1,000-year-old religion. I'm the poor chap who has to keep up with all the paperwork. I mean, that's to me a direct link to all those people who contributed to the Old and New Testament. When you realize, some of these people wrote this stuff down. For example, the 4 apostles who wrote the Gospels wrote that stuff down 30 years after it happened.
Yeah.
And I was trying to tell my students, can you imagine if the first thing ever written about George Washington didn't happen until, John Quincy Adams was president? Yeah. How much stuff you will forget in 30 years. So
that's true.
And my other favorite line was from Berengaria when she was in the prison, where she says something about the tedium of undeserved divinity. That is one of the great lines of all time when you think about immortality, is that, yes, you may live forever, but it's going to get really boring because every 30 to 50 years, everything you know is going to be gone. You'll still be here, but then you're going to have to make all new friends, and you're going to have to live in an entirely new world. Yeah. Now, there's some great stuff. Tom Robbins wrote a novel about a guy who becomes immortal, and he lives from the medieval time Scottish Highlands right up until the modern time. I think it's called Jitterbug Perfume, if anybody's read that. So, and it talks about the fact that how it's very difficult to get involved in a life because ultimately you're going to outlive all of these people. You're going to outlive your children and your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and just have to start all over again. So, yes, the tedium of undeserved divinity.
Which, honestly, does relate back to the Doctor, because he keeps regenerating. He has to keep going through all this, and when he has to get a new companion, sometimes it can be hard for him to get a new companion depending on what happened to the last one. Especially apparently in the classics, it was common for the companions to just go, or he drops them off or something. What happened, again, hopefully everyone watched Earthshock, but what happened with Adric, that was rare for a companion to just die. Whereas now in modern Doctor Who, I think only one of his companions has actually lived, and he's had 5 so far. And it's and we went through a whole thing, and I know there's a lot of people that watch my modern Doctor Who reactions that have heard me rant about leaving characters too many times, so I'll keep this brief. But sometimes, he'll drop off a companion, but then he just can't let them go fully, so he has to keep going back, and then eventually they just die, and it's there's part of his problem too. He just needs to move on. Yeah. But that definitely does relate back to the Doctor. Let's see here. Everything with tradition was interesting, even down to when Pepin's wife went to go talk to his mother to try to get her to join the rebellion against Pepin. And, she's, all chained up there, and it's well, do you have a knife? It's what? It's well, I had a knife when I met my mother-in-law. It's if you don't have a knife, if you haven't come here to skin me alive, then you're nothing. You're not good enough to be the Empress. Yeah. Which was funny. Just the fact that, they are all so just completely into all this, torture that happens because of these traditions, which is interesting.
My favorite line in this third section, and again, I think it may have been Tacitus, but they were talking about the rituals, and he says something to the effect of, look, I don't understand it, but I do know my role in it. We just do it because that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got.
Yeah. And now it's interesting to think about it that Pepin, we're on the 7th Pepin, and this is seems to be the first one that's sort of breaking the traditions. Like, no, I'm not a god. I don't feel like a god. I'm still just me. I'm sorry, but I'll be put to death, but that's just how it happens. Now, this is when the Doctor and Frobisher come in, and eventually Frobisher kind of becomes their god accidentally. And, this is when we have Childrix and the child, which leads to what should have been just the start over of this fiction. So is it that every time when this world needs to start over is when one of the emperors just kind of goes away from the tradition?
Yeah, that was kind of hard to tell. And it also makes you wonder, have there actually been 6 Pepins before this? Or when the story starts over, does it start over at the same point with the death of the old Pepin and the new one?
Yeah.
And it's just a constant repeat. And again, there's only this kind of vague memory in everybody's mind.
Yeah.
Like, what we know, we're supposed to know that this has happened thousands and thousands of times.
Yeah.
But nobody remembers exactly what happened. So
right, and that would be why every time the story continues, the only thing Tacitus really remembers is the child. So,
yeah.
Which I will say, when they were sort of, when he was confronting the child, and they were like, well, why did you kill him? And it's like, I was insane. It's like, and that's it. We're doing all of this because you were insane and you just happened to kill your child one night. It's like, okay. So I just kind of wrote that down as he's insane. It's like, so this is just one giant confusing mental ward. It's like, it just put him to death or something. Why do we have to go through all this?
That again, vague historical references. That kind of reminded me of Ivan the Terrible, who ruler of Russia, that everybody tolerated up to the point where he killed his son.
Yeah.
Got into an argument with him and literally just strangled him in front of the entire court. And up to that point, people were willing to forgive him. But after that, it's like, okay, you do understand. You just killed your own child. So,
Yeah.
you have, the butter has slipped off your noodles. You've gone round the bend.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was just interesting. It's just all of this just because he was insane. Like, all right. Let's see. It was also interesting that, they sort of say that this whole prison is similar to the TARDIS, that it's sort of bigger on the inside.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. And then, the Doctor didn't really... I don't know, he was just... I guess he was playing the role that, honestly, the Time Lords are always supposed to do. The Time Lords are always supposed to be just observers. They don't really get involved. That's what makes the Doctor so different from them all, is that he does intervene in a lot of stuff. But here, he was really just the observer until the end.
Yeah.
So, that was interesting. Let's see.
I thought it was interesting in part 4, right there at the beginning, there was some reference to God did us no favor to give us free will. I can't remember exactly how that was put, but you have a God who sets down a list of rules and regulations. This is what you need for salvation, and then he says, but you have the option to not do that. The problem is, by giving you free will, and if you choose not to do what he says, then you are eternally punished for that.
Yeah.
And that seems to be not free will, because, if the choice is do this or be punished, then you don't have free will. I mean, it's almost like the predestination argument. I'm not going to get into that. But, the fact is, there are people in this world throughout centuries, Gandhi and others are usually brought up as the example, who are non-Christians, but are people who have lived, for the most part, exemplary lives. And so, are we going to say that a non-Christian or a non-Hebrew is condemned for not either knowing or simply not following the particular rituals of this particular religion? So, again, that's way over the head of anything I think we were doing here, but it. Yeah. That line really struck me. It's it's no favor for God to have given us free will. So, interesting thought.
Yeah, and just that idea of, well, you do have a choice. You can do everything here, or you will be eternally punished. Like, well, that's not really a choice. That's an ultimatum. It's like, that's not, that's and the extreme version of that. It's like, well, why can't I choose option 3? Where is option 3? So, there's
a huge debate, of course, in the Christian church over that for many, many years, because the idea that you cannot go to heaven unless you go through Jesus, then, what about all those people in the ancient world? What about Socrates? What about all these virtuous people who lived before Jesus was born?
Yeah.
And then they came up with this idea, again, to explain that. Please don't think this is blasphemous or anything. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Harrowing of Hell. You guys may have learned that hell is supposed to have several different levels. And the idea was that when Jesus died on Friday, he descended into hell first before ascending up to heaven on Sunday. And that he went through and basically, I don't want to say pardoned, but simply absolved all of these people who lived before him, but who had led virtuous lives of being stuck either in purgatory or in hell because they happened to have lived before he did. So again, I'm not incredibly familiar with that, but I do know that there's an entire story about how his descent into hell releases all of these people from either limbo or purgatory or whatever. So again, don't quote me on that.
Yeah. Let's see. See, some of this stuff, like when I would write it down, it is sort of answered by the fact that, well, this is all a fiction. Like, how when they did the assassination ritual on Frobisher, he did survive. Or when he and Pepin went to the mother, he was able to heal them. It's like, well, he shouldn't have that power. He isn't a god. He's just a shapeshifter. But it's all just a part of this fiction. So that was interesting. And I wrote down, like, we had multiple gods for a while.
Yeah. One more Shakespearean quote in there. I can't remember who said it, but there was so much blood. Who would have thought the old man had so much blood in him, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So again, whoever wrote this, again, very well versed in both literature and history. And again, using a lot of that to disguise the fact that finally somebody says, hey, wait a minute, the difference this time around is that the Doctor and Frobisher and the TARDIS appeared, and that's what ultimately, accidentally, apparently breaks the cycle.
Yeah, that's true. The levels of cruelty were also interesting in this. Like, when the child just completely melts Childrix, and the nice thing about audio, they can put in as many gooey sound effects as they want to. That was interesting. And then again, the mother-in-law saying, it's like, well, when I went to talk to my mother-in-law, I always took a knife so I could just take a different piece of her face until eventually, like, all that was left was eyes when, we executed her. It's like, all right, cool.
Yeah, and then, I mean, beyond cruelty, where they heal Arnulf only to kill him. They give him back his tongue, give him back his voice, and then immediately kill him. So, I mean, that's somewhat cruel, too, when you stop and think about it.
And also the original idea behind the child when Childrix had him and is like, okay, well, he's been kept away. The only person he's seen is Arnulf, who can't speak, so he will develop his own divine language, and then he just comes out and he speaks English anyway. And it's like, well, although you can almost think, like, I wonder, because, like, either that is part of the fiction that he already knows this, and it sort of relates back to the scribe. He would know the English, so that maybe it passes on into the child. Although it would be interesting if they had said that it's like, well, he hasn't heard any English ever. It's like, well, how is he speaking? Well, the TARDIS translates him. It could be that the TARDIS was doing that.
Yeah. And again, one last little thing on the boy. Because this is a fiction, is the boy the actual representation of the boy that Eugene Tacitus had killed, or is it just Eugene Tacitus' own conscience coming back to torture him for having accidentally killed his child? I wrote down, it's a prison for one, and you got to break the cycle by letting this happen. Every time you've stopped it and you've prevented it before, the only way to, this is Tony Stark's, this is the only way to end this.
Yes, because he has said every time this happens, he kills the child again. And he says, I keep killing it, he just keeps coming back. But this was the only time, despite, finally the doctor, when he was starting to object at the end, finally it was the kid killing him. And it was pretty much just a suicide at that point. Just to break the cycle, he had to die instead of the child.
You have to atone for your sin,
Yeah.
Eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was all pretty interesting, I have to say. So, yeah, do you have any other things you would like to say on it?
No, I'm looking here. No, again, the writer, obviously very well versed in history and in not only in medieval but also in literature, Shakespearean literature, and Roman literature and all this sort of stuff, and just again the level of humor, almost, and some of that was simply in some of the accents that they used. When you're watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and you've got guys like Dennis, how did you get to be the king? Well, the Lady of the Lake, some watery bit hoisting scimitars out of a lake is not a proper, it's the distribution of swords of something is not the proper way to govern a kingdom. It's just the wonderful little accents and things like that added to the humor. And again, overall, I'd say yes, if you guys are younger than I am, you're probably going to enjoy this more, but as an old fart, no, I given the opportunity, I would probably skip most of these. Now, I would read the book. If these were in book form, I would read them, but listening to them, it doesn't do much for me. So.
And I believe this... no, okay. I thought that this was one of the ones that was adapted from one of the comic books, but I don't think so. I think the others are adapted. The next one we have is adapted from one of the novels. But I personally was okay with it. For some reason, we have more footage. I don't know how... I don't know, my phone is weird. So apparently we're still going. I don't know, it's probably just deleting all my other files so it can make room for this. But, oh well. I don't know. But yeah, I was okay with it. The only thing was actually, was the doctor's voice.
Yeah.
And especially sometimes, when he would come on and it's like, okay, is that him or is that Tacitus? Like, no, that's the doctor, I'm pretty sure. So that was the one that got me. But other than that, I was fine with it. So, yeah, it was definitely interesting. It was definitely an interesting experience to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
And we do have 2 more audios that we're going to do.
Okay.
Do we have... and after all the 50th anniversary, we'll have one more. And then I think that's it.
Okay.
So
I'm really looking forward to the episodes where several of the doctors meet. I've kind of seen some previews of that online.
I've heard of those. Yeah,
that just, of course, Hartnell had already passed away by that time, or was too ill to do it. So they have another actor who simply looks like him. But it's just fascinating to see, the first Doctor and the second Doctor and the third Doctor and even the fourth Doctor all together in the same room. And it's like, oh, that's got to be really, really funny.
Yeah, and especially since they all sort of are the opposite of their last personality. So, like, how do they all interact with each other?
No.
Yeah. But let's see. Next week, we are moving on to the 7th Doctor. We have an audio from 2015.
Now, 7th Doctor, that's the one whose companion is Ace?
Yes, that is McCoy.
Right, McCoy.
Sylvester McCoy. So this will be, 2015. So, yeah, it's quite a long time after he was on Doctor Who, because he was in the 80s. So that'll be interesting. We'll have to see how different his voice is. But we will be listening to Damaged Goods, an adaptation of one of the Doctor Who novels. We will have to see what that's all about. That's pretty much that. Yep. With all that being said, we're Alex and Dad from 7th Hour Films, and we will see you guys next time. Take care. Alright guys, thanks for watching this video. If you want to watch more of our Doctor Who Classic videos, this isn't a reaction, but you can click on the playlist, you can subscribe if you haven't done that already, and be sure you hit that notification bell. You can support me on Patreon and follow me on social media, links below in the description. See you guys later.